Walkouts and infighting ends lame duck in Lansing that definitely ruffled feathers. Plus, Senator Debbie Stabenow on saying goodbye to the Senate. It's Sunday, December 22nd, and this is Flashpoint. Hi there, and welcome to Flashpoint. I'm Christy McDonald. So glad that you're with me this Sunday as we head into a holiday week. But it really was anything but jolly in Lansing this week as legislators endured long nights, in-party fighting, and last-ditch efforts to pass anything. What they left on the table and how a Republican-controlled House will change the agenda when they head back in January. We'll talk about that with our roundtable, who have logged some serious hours in Lansing these past few weeks. And then, how do you describe a 50-year career in politics? I'm sure there are a few choice words, and one woman with no shortage of them, Senator Debbie Stabenow. Our conversation as she says goodbye to the Senate. It's all coming up. Flashpoint starts right now. All right, let's get started with finishing up in Lansing this week. Say hello to Chad Livengood, politics editor and columnist at the Detroit News. Chad, it's good to see you. Zoe Clark, the political director at Michigan Public, and Lauren Gibbons, Capitol reporter for Bridge, Michigan. It's good to have you all here. I have 20,000 questions, but as we launch into, I figured you would have. But I guess the first one is really, what happened? How did it all break down? It wasn't all bad news. I mean, the Senate is still doing some work. But Chad, let me start with you. When you put this in context for people about a lame duck session, how would you compare it to ones we've seen in the past?
So the lame duck session, for people who don't know, is the time between the election and the end of the year when the legislature sometimes
it's the
filled
last gasp of saying, what can we get done?
Yes, and there are a few lame ducks where people who are leaving office because they lost re-election or they decided not to run for re-election, and now also the House is turning over and changing majorities. So the Democrats have their last chance here to get anything they want to get done. All their policy priorities, because this is their 1-2-year period in 40 years that they've been in complete control of state government. So the whole table was set for so a big, huge, hundreds of bills being passed.
You think they'd be in
new
lockstep.
laws. You would think they had a plan, but the plan just didn't seem to be, at least on the House side, didn't seem to be at all fully baked or much even scratched out because they came in and what happened essentially was they had a standoff with Republicans. Republicans wanted some bills to scale back a minimum wage increase for tipped workers and a new sick law, paid sick time law that goes on the books in February. Democrats balked at it. They said no. And then there was another Democrat, Karen Whitsett of Detroit, who decided that she had some other policy priorities and she wasn't going to be sitting around for any more late nights until they started voting on her policy priorities. So she started the boycotting as well. And by then you no longer have a quorum to actually pass anything. And so that's what turned into the meltdown we saw Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, when you have words like meltdown and chaos and malfunction in the headlines.
Disaster, unprecedented.
Add some more, Zoe, while you can. But when you look at that and you see what the breakdown is, and you understand coming from another party, but when you see the infighting there, was there anything that led you to believe that this was how it was going to turn out in the last couple of weeks?
It's a great question. I mean, all year long, what we have seen is really inaction from Democrats, and some of that had to do with issues of absences. Some lawmakers simply, again, not showing up. The other was it was very hard for this Democratic caucus to all get on the same page, right? This, as Chad said, was the first time that Democrats were running the show in 40 years. I spoke with Senate Majority Leader Winnie Brinks early in the session. I said, are Democrats going to know how to do this? And she said, well, we're a little rusty. Right? Mm-hmm. And I think what you saw is competing priorities. And unlike Republicans who tend to fall in line, Democrats simply just were not able to do that this year. And there was a lot of conversation ahead of the election. Wait till lame duck. We'll get it done in lame duck. Mm-hmm. And that's simply not what happened.
And you look to the leadership then, Lauren, about whose responsibility is this to make sure that people do get in line and they coalesce around some of the same priorities so they can push at least a couple of things through. Joe Tate has taken a lot of heat as Speaker of the House from his own party.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing Republicans and Democrats can agree on right now, it's to criticize Joe Tate's leadership in this instance. You had the entire Republican caucus spending their time pretty much anywhere but the state Capitol. I was at a press conference yesterday morning at the Coney Island where they were talking about the paid sick and minimum wage issue. And then you had many other Democrats, not just Karen Whitsitt, criticizing the fact that a lot of these big policy priorities, especially progressive issues, you're hearing from a lot of progressive Democrats that none of these things were really getting off the ground. And it does come down to the fact that Speaker Tate was not able to get at almost anything over the finish line in lame duck, and I think a lot of Democrats will remember that for a long time.
Chad, talk to me, though, about what his role is or what he could have done in this case with his job, because he's had the job now for 2 years.
Yeah, as the Speaker of the House, you are in control of everything. You control the budgets, who gets a certain number of staffers, and what bills move and don't move and get put up for a vote. So you have control, and he had the opportunity if he wanted to. I mean, but then you also face all these other external pressures, like the United Auto Workers and other unions said, do not touch this sick time leave, even though all these small businesses and all these bartenders were showing up saying,
this is going to
you know, if you have this minimum wage go up to be equal to normal minimum wage, people won't tip me as much, so I won't make as much money, and I'll suffer from it as a result. Or these businesses they say they'll suffer because they have to raise prices of food and drink in the new year. And so this is just one example where you're, as a speaker, you are getting every ear in everyone's in your ear, and there's no escaping it. Then you have other factors. You have a governor who seemed to be at times pretty standoffish to this lame duck session. You know, she came out and said, I want some economic development bills. I like to have a road funding plan, even though she's had a total control of the legislature for 2 years. And at the end of it, she's finally, this is the fix the damn roads governor, finally saying, I want to get a big road funding plan together. And it just felt a little half-hearted at times that they'd come in at the last minute and say, bring me something and I'll sign it.
That was interesting that you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you, Zoe, what is the role of the governor? I mean, would you have expected to see Governor Whitmer a lot more during this session?
Yeah, well, yes. Shout out to the Detroit News, which did some really interesting reporting earlier this year that said that this governor was actually out of state for 25% of the time. Now, of course, she was co-chair of the Biden campaign, then the Harris campaign. She wrote a book. She did national tours. She was fundraising. But when you, again, have the first in 40 years Democratic control, you know, there is an agenda, a backlog of things that you want to get done. And a lot of folks this week talking about sort of surprising that Whitmer wasn't more just even there at the Capitol. You know, she has a ceremonial office where sometimes governors work out of. And in past sessions, governors will actually come on the floor and have conversations, right? And instead, when the House really was on Wednesday just imploding, she sent out a tweet on X, a video basically saying, I'm looking forward to 2025.
I mean, it's essentially just saying,
let's
just wake up. Let's wake up in January. You know, before we get to what was left on the table, what's some of the work that the Senate did and what we can look forward to 25, Lauren, it makes me really think about how people perceive this, right? I don't think that people pay a lot of attention to the comings and goings of the Michigan legislature until you see something like this. And then you see headlines and people are like, oh, it's dysfunctional and it doesn't work. What we all saw, but some people say, but this is how government works. Sometimes there has to be some pain. What would you tell people to expect from a legislature, or what they can, I guess, understand from seeing what they took place?
You know, I think this is a pretty unusual situation. Usually during lame duck, you will see at least a few big policy priorities get through. To see them adjourn without taking up hundreds of Senate bills, you know, to the disappointment of Senate Democrats who are still running session as we speak right now, that is pretty significant and pretty unusual. And I think over the last year, it was really interesting because when Democrats started this trifecta, they came out the gate, they were pushing out so many significant pieces of legislation. And they tried to run on that in 2024, despite not doing very much in 2024. It was all pretty much that first 6 months of the trifecta. So now, you know, the public looks at this and it's just like, well, you didn't get much done in 2024 besides maybe the budget.
And then again, looking forward to 2025. Chad, let me ask you, what was left on the table? We talked about the tipped wage and we talked about sick leave, the SOAR fund, other business incentives. What do you think that was missed opportunity here?
I mean, they could have spent money. I mean, they have money to spend, and that's what a lot of legislatures do in their final days. Mm-hmm. They pass an appropriations bill. Another big one was the Freedom of Information Act extension to include the governor and the legislature.
For the first time,
Michigan
it was getting close, right?
Michigan is in the dark ages when it comes to transparency. Among all other states, we're one of 2 states where the legislature and the governor don't have to follow the same law that they make everyone else follow. In every level of government, where their records are subject to public inspection. And this bill had passed the Senate June or
earlier, but for the first
long time, months ago,
like
and then it passed a committee just last week, and so it was sitting there teed up, ready to go. There probably were the votes from both sides. A bipartisan vote was probably there, but that's another victim of this. And so that bill literally has been worked on by 2 senators, Jeremy Moss and Ed McBroom, since they were in the House 10 years ago. I mean, they've been working on this for a decade now, and it all fizzled. And it's hard to see how that kind of legislation will get the kind of momentum again, particularly when we go to divided government next year, and there'll be less and less incentive to do something.
You know, I think that's what people are thinking about too. What can we expect now in 25 as we take a deep breath from what we've just experienced this past couple of weeks, Zoe?
Yeah. I think had there not been such frustration, right, particularly among the House internally as a caucus, and then also what we're seeing in the Senate among Republican leaders, things are going to be frosty in January. It's good. Folks are going to take a little break, right? But you're going to see a Matt Hall come in with majority power for the first time. He has won this round, and I think it makes him feel even stronger going into a session where road funding and a fix on tipped wage is going to be high priority. But what that looks like in terms of the negotiations is really going to be fascinating.
The art of the deal. Lauren, what are you looking forward to?
I'm really interested in seeing how Governor Gretchen Whitmer takes 2025. She's obviously looking ahead to it. She didn't put much stock in this lame duck process. What does she want to get out of her last 2 years as governor? How does she want to be perceived both in Michigan and nationally? She doesn't have to run again, so it'll be really interesting to see, you know, whether she's willing to play ball with Republicans on issues that she campaigned on. Road funding is a big one. You know, will she have more success in sort of that divided government, which she spent most of her career in up to this point? That remains to be seen, but that's sort of what I'm looking at.
All right, Chad, you get the last 30 seconds on what you're projecting for 25 issue-wise.
I think the road funding is an issue that will reignite itself. We're about to head into pothole season in Michigan, where the freeze and thaw cycle is already underway, and our roads will start crumbling. And this is the best time of the year, really, if you want to talk about that subject with the general public. And these, as both of them mentioned, the first 100 days here are really going to be crucial. If you want to do a deal between the Republican House and the Democratic governor and Democratic Senate, this is the time to do it.
Well, everyone feels kind of good heading into the beginning of the year. Chad Livengood, Zoe Clark, Lauren Gibbons, thanks so much for being with me. I hope you guys have a great new year, all right?
So good to be with you.
We'll see you in 25. All right, coming up next, my sit down with Senator Debbie Stabenow as she reflects on a career in politics. Stay with me.